And we are now live on Facebook. All right, thank you everyone who is tuning in for the live webinar and for everyone who is watching afterwards. My name is Rivka Cohen. I am the program manager at JOFA, the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance, and I am here with Melissa Rosen from Sharsheret. She is the Director of National Outreach. She has a master's degree in Jewish Communal Service from Brandeis University and has been working in the nonprofit sector for over 25 years. Her professional experience includes informal education, advocacy, and community outreach. Melissa oversees the outreach efforts throughout the country, amplifying Sharsheret's reach and connecting as many as possible to the support and resources of Sharsheret. Herself a breast cancer survivor, she is passionate about the Jewish community and cancer support and advocacy. We are so grateful to have you with us, Melissa. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Rivka. So as Rivka said, I am the Director of National Outreach at Sharsheret, and I'm actually joined by Peggy Cottrell, who is our genetic counselor. I want to thank you all for joining us today to explore this important topic. So in the next little bit, we'll introduce you to Sharsheret, explain why this is a Jewish issue, how to determine personal risk, and how to be empowered and proactive about your health. And we'll answer any questions you may have. So to start out, for those of you who are not familiar, Sharsheret is the only organization that offers culturally relevant, culturally meaningful support for Jewish women and families facing breast cancer, ovarian cancer, who carry genetic mutations or are concerned about that. And I think maybe one of the most common questions we get is, why do we need a Jewish organization for this? There are so many other wonderful cancer organizations, and there are, but there are two specific and very important reasons that Sharsheret, in its 18 years, has existed and will continue to exist. The first is quite simply a genetic issue. We are at much higher risk for carrying a BRCA mutation, and Peggy will talk about that in a little bit. And then the second are specific cultural or halachic issues. Examples of that might include, well, listen, Pesach is coming up. You could be a completely healthy woman with no children who doesn't work outside of the home, and Pesach is a bear to prepare for. So imagine, like so many women, you do work outside of the home, you have other obligations, and you're facing the effects of cancer treatment, the debilitating effects. How do you deal with that? Or when the high holidays are upon us and you have gone obviously every year and participated with the liturgy, but imagine being diagnosed with a life-altering and possibly life-threatening disease and having to listen to the Unatana Token, who shall live and who shall die, and how that changes that year for you. Possibly the issue of tattooing, which is necessary for certain breast cancer treatments. And we have such a huge taboo against tattooing in our community, and how to get around that. And of course, the issue of community. We have such an amazing community that offers so much help and support, and it's so appreciated by families facing cancer, and yet sometimes that support can feel overwhelming and suffocating. So we help women deal with cultural issues such as those. We help all women, no matter their connection to the Jewish community, unaffiliated through ultra-Orthodox, and at all stages. Someone who's concerned about or who has been diagnosed with a BRCA mutation, but has yet to be or has not been diagnosed with cancer. Sometimes those are called previvors. Those in the diagnostic process, in treatment, those facing advanced disease or in survivorship. And we do that through 12 wonderful national programs. I'm just going to mention a couple of them now. We have our genetics program, Genetics for Life, which Peggy manages. We have a Busy Box program for women facing breast or ovarian cancer while raising small children, raising their family. And for that, we will send a child or children a huge box of toys, and hidden under those toys is how to talk to your children in a developmentally appropriate way about what's going on. We have a program for caregivers, a program for those facing metastatic disease. We have an amazing survivorship program that's all about moving forward healthfully, both physically and emotionally. And of course, we have our peer support program, which we do differently than anybody else. We match women based on their exact diagnosis, based on their stage of life, because a cancer experience is so very different if you're young and single versus whether you have toddlers or teens in your home. And of course, based on their relationship to Judaism. Is it something that informs your daily living or something you don't think about on a regular basis? And the reason we match at so many different points is because when you have a diagnosis such as cancer, you're constantly explaining yourself to others. Your doctor, your boss, your friend. We want someone who gets who you are as a person to help you through your cancer experience. We also have a team of clinicians that are always taking calls, everything from the very simple, I'm about to start chemo, where can I find a wig in my zip code, to the far more complicated, my doctor says she thinks it might be cancer, help. So, and all of the support programs that we offer are 100% individualized, confidential, and 100% free. No woman ever pays for the support she gets at Sharsheret. And in addition to our amazing clinical team, we have a very robust education department that offers symposia several times a year, or webinar symposia several times a year. We have educational resources that are displayed at doctors' offices, hospitals, synagogues, JCCs, and we do community events. Things such as this, such as Sharsheret Pink Shabbat programs and Pink Holiday, Pink Challah baking programs, all to raise awareness about our risk, our heightened risk, and what we can do to manage it. So at Sharsheret, we really believe in stories. So I want to start off telling you my personal Sharsheret story, and then I'm going to cede the camera to Peggy Cottrell for a little bit to start talking about ways we can be proactive. So my Sharsheret story is that I was diagnosed with breast cancer just over 4 years ago. My diagnosis was a direct result of radiation from a previous cancer 17 years earlier. Because I knew I was at higher risk for breast cancer, my doctor and I created a specific plan, and we decided that I would start mammograms early and then alternate them with MRIs, which are a higher tech diagnostic tool. It was actually the MRI that caught my breast cancer, and it was before, had I not had a special plan unique to myself, it was before I would have even started mammograms. So I'm sharing my story because, not just to share my story, but because the point is, I very specifically knew what needed to be done for me, how to monitor my own personal needs. And I think if you take anything away from this conversation today, it's that, to take personal responsibility for your health and to create a customized plan with your doctor. So I want to review what we can do. I have 4 points I want to make. The first one is about family history and genetics. And for that, I would like to introduce Peggy Cottrell, certified genetic counselor who is part of our staff and a wonderful resource.
Hello, how are you? I'm here just to give you a little bit of an update about cancer genetics. So Melissa really explained already why this is such an important Jewish issue, and that's because mutations in BRCA1 and BRCA2 are significantly more common in the Ashkenazi population. So even within the medical guidelines that are published to help us understand how to take care of people who have cancer, it says if women have Ashkenazi ancestry, it's very important to include genetic testing as part of their care. Breast cancer is pretty common. About 1 in 8 women will get breast cancer at some point in their life. But ovarian cancer is more rare. Only about 1 in 70 women will get ovarian cancer. And it's a combination of breast cancer, ovarian cancer, sometimes pancreatic cancer or prostate cancer, sometimes men with breast cancer, multiple generations affected with cancer. These are all red flags that would lead someone to consider a genetics workup. So when someone has an appointment with genetics, they would sit with a genetic counselor. They would go through in detail the family tree, the person's own possible diagnosis with cancer, and try to determine what test would make the most sense to determine if there was something inherited. Now, anybody could get cancer, and cancer develops in anyone as a result of actually genetic changes that happen in our body cells. And these can accumulate over time in anyone and gradually lead to the development of cancer. If someone has something inherited, it doesn't mean they will definitely get cancer, but it means that their chance is higher because that first mistake, the first step on the pathway, is there before they're even born. And so if we're able to identify this change, again, similarly to what Melissa said, because she was at higher risk, she could have a special plan made up just for her. And the same way with people who may have something inherited that's causing cancer in their family, they can then have a special plan that's developed just for them to reduce the chance that they'll get cancer and increase the chance that if they do get it, it's diagnosed at a very early and treatable stage. So some people are nervous about the possibility of a genetic test. It can be frightening to consider the possibility that you have a higher chance than other people. And if there was nothing we could do differently, we would say, why find this information out? It's just going to scare you. Let's see what happens. Let's watch you and see what happens. But in fact, because we have these special tools that give us the opportunity to really save people's lives, we want to increase the awareness so that people take a look at their personal and family history and figure out if this is something that perhaps they need to get done. If someone in the family has something inherited that's causing cancer, there's a 50% chance it could be passed to the next generation. And I think for most women, that's the scariest part of finding out about this kind of information, because the concern is that it might be something that could be affecting other people in the family that you love. It might have come from one of your parents. Your sisters or brothers might have inherited it. And the next generation, your children, your nieces, your nephews, could also be affected. And that's what makes this often very frightening. So what are some of the things that could be done differently for someone who might have inherited cancer? So one of the first ones to consider is something that Melissa mentioned, which is increased surveillance. And so for someone who has an inherited mutation or even a strong family history, we might recommend not just a mammogram starting at age 40, but we might want people to start screening earlier. And in fact, to consider having, in addition to the mammogram, a sonogram and a breast MRI. Very often this kind of care is best managed by a breast surgeon. And so sometimes, even though someone might not be planning to have surgery, they may go see a breast surgeon who orders these tests and we'll do a breast exam and we'll take care. Sometimes it's possible to use a medication to reduce the risk of developing cancer. And many women are surprised to learn there are medications that reduce the risk of breast cancer. These include medications like tamoxifen. Most people are familiar with tamoxifen because they've heard of women with breast cancer who've taken that medication. But in fact, women who are high risk to develop cancer can also take tamoxifen and reduce their risk of developing cancer. And that would be done, again, under the auspices of a physician. And then the final option to consider if someone is at high risk is a scary option, which is actually having surgery. And so if someone has a very high chance of developing breast cancer, they can consider having a mastectomy before cancer even develops. And so someone could choose a bilateral mastectomy with reconstruction. And then the risk of developing breast cancer would be reduced from the possible 60 or 70% chance that would go along with the inherited mutation to much lower than the general population risk. And so it's a big price to pay for that reduction in risk. But for some women, it's very important to them not only to be able to find a cancer early, but to be able to significantly reduce the chance that it will ever develop. In terms of a mastectomy, this is not something that we tell women they should do. It's reasonable to either consider the careful screening, the breast MRI, the sonogram, visiting the breast surgeon, or to have the bilateral mastectomy, and both are acceptable ways to be able to manage the high risk. But the risk of ovarian cancer, and it's very important to clarify this point, we don't have any good screening tools for ovarian cancer. And so while someone could have a transvaginal sonogram or a CA-125 blood test, those tests have never been proven to reduce mortality that comes from ovarian cancer. And so what happens when you have those screenings done is you will eventually find the ovarian cancer, but often it's not found at a time when it can be cured. And so what we recommend for people to consider who are at high risk for ovarian cancer, and that is women with BRCA1 or BRCA2 mutations, that when they're done having children, that they have their ovaries taken out. And having the ovaries taken out significantly reduces the chance that they'll ever get ovarian cancer. And we have the opportunity by offering this surgery to really save women's lives. The chance for ovarian cancer is not as high as the chance for breast cancer, but because it can be so deadly and so hard to find early, this is something that we really want to encourage women to consider. So BRCA1 and 2 are certainly the most likely to be causing inherited breast cancer in Ashkenazi women, but there are other genes as well that we would look for. Very often now when this testing is done, we don't no longer just look at BRCA1 and 2, but we often look at a panel of genes that would include genes like TP53, like PALB2, like CHEK2, ATM, and other genes that could be increasing the risk for breast and for ovarian cancer. The cost of genetic testing is continuing to get lower and lower. And for people who may not have insurance or whose insurance will not cover, we can offer people a genetic test in the possible realm of about $250. And so some women might think, well, this kind of testing is very expensive. It's going to cost thousands of dollars, and my insurance is never going to cover it. In fact, for many women, insurance covers. And for those where insurance doesn't cover, the opportunity is there to have a test that can be done relatively inexpensively. So we want everyone to have a conversation in their family to talk about what kind of cancer is in the family, to talk about these risks, and with Jewish ancestry, even to consider that if there's no family history of cancer, sometimes when there are small families that predominate with men, it can be difficult to see a family history that may be indicative of the mutation that's in the family. So this is an important thing for everyone to be talking about and to be aware of.
Thank you, Peggy. That was actually incredibly helpful. I just returned from a business trip where I did a session like this in person, and we finished that part of the conversation with Pesach is coming up. Many of you will be with your families. It's the perfect opportunity to start this conversation. It's a great way to change the conversation when it leads to politics. Just switch it to something that might save your life. Very important. Okay. So thank you, and Peggy's going to stick around in case there are questions about this. So I talked about 4 things. So the first one, know your family history and discuss with your doctor whether genetic screening is warranted. Number 2 is know your own body. Peggy mentioned that with or without BRCA, 1 in 8 women in this country will be diagnosed with breast cancer. So sometimes I feel like it's a little bit of a bait and switch. We ask you if you to get screened for BRCA, and if you don't have it, for sure, that is wonderful news, but it doesn't let you off the hook for caring for your body. You need to be aware of what's normal. And we of course know that there are obvious changes that are maybe of concern, like a lump in breast tissue, but I wanted to make sure you were aware that it really goes beyond what most people consider breast tissue. Something under the arm or directly under the breast would be something to be on top of, or a rash or redness or dimpling, a thickening of the skin, unexplained changes in the size of a breast, all something that may warrant a call to the doctor. Now, everything I just mentioned is likely not breast cancer, but it's much better. So there's no reason to panic, but it's much better to call your doctor, see if an appointment is warranted, and be told it's nothing to worry about. And, you know, although I'm not necessarily a big believer in women's intuition, I have heard enough women say, I just knew something wasn't right, so I went to the doctor, and that's how they were diagnosed. So if you have a feeling that your body isn't right, it may be worth considering a trip to the doctor. So, okay, so now we've talked about knowing your family history, your genetic status. We've talked about knowing your own body. Let's talk for a second about healthy living. We need to be proactive about our health in general, not just breast health. And all those things the doctors tell us to do that we really don't want to do really do reduce risk of breast and ovarian cancer, of all cancers. And in fact, of heart disease and diabetes and dementia. So these are win-wins. So the first thing I'm going to suggest is eat well. I am not telling you to never have desserts. Maybe we can limit desserts to Chagim and Shabbat, birthday celebrations. Just know that most of the time that you eat, your plate should be filled with a variety of colors and whole grains. The second thing, be active. Now, I'm not asking you to run a marathon, unless, of course, you're interested, and then you can race with Team Sharsheret and contact us afterward. But I am asking for you to take walks. You know, Shabbat walks or walks after dinner with our families are a great way to incorporate activity into our lives and also connect with our loved ones. And then, of course, the hardest of all is to be present in our lives and reduce stress. Now, I understand that asking a group of very busy Jewish women to reduce stress in their lives very often elicits laughter. There are a lot of simple things you can do. Listen, if it's possible to offload some of your responsibilities, that's wonderful. If it's possible to remove toxic relationships from your life, that's wonderful. To join a yoga class. But if those things aren't possible or practical, the simple act of whenever you feel stressed, closing your eyes, taking a couple of deep cleansing breaths, you can actually feel the change in your body. It's almost like hitting a reset button. And that's something that all of us can do. Okay, so we've talked about knowing your family history. We've talked about knowing your own body. We've talked about healthy living. Let's talk about that last thing, which is committing to the appropriate screenings and not pushing them off. Government recommendations are absolutely not one size fits all. And for those of us of Ashkenazi descent, again, we're at higher risk. So together with your family history and your personal health history, create a plan with the doctor. And your plan may be exactly what you've heard recommended on the news, or it could be vastly different. And your plan should take into account not only family history and personal health history, but also what's comfortable for you, what you're likely to do. And it really is a conversation. But here's what I know. There isn't a person who's logged on to this webinar who would allow a child's lingering cough to go without a visit to the pediatrician. And yet every day as women, we put ourselves at the bottom of the list. We have Pesach shopping to do and work obligations and family commitments. And we say, we'll get to it, we'll get to it. And we don't get to it. So again, if you learn anything from today, it's to put yourself on that list, to be proactive about health. So important, it really is. And by the way, by caring for yourself, you're modeling for your children and your grandchildren. You're modeling that it's okay to care for oneself. How will your children know that's okay unless you show that to them? Okay, so all of these 4 things that we've spoken about lower your risk significantly, but unfortunately cannot prevent all diagnoses. But if the worst occurs, as Peggy mentioned, these things will help you be diagnosed at a much earlier, stage, which may allow for less invasive treatment and higher survival rates. And the other thing is that being healthy gives you the strength to heal. So I started off today talking about my Sharsheret story. I want to talk about yours for a second as we end. Everyone has a Sharsheret story. Maybe you know someone who was helped by Sharsheret. Maybe some of you actually were yourselves. If not, I'm hoping that today is the start of yours and that you will continue to be proactive for yourself and also help raise awareness for your own individual communities. You can do that by attending additional awareness and education programs, or helping plan one of your own in your community, a parlor meeting, a pink challah bake, a Sharsheret pink Shabbat. You can definitely go on our website to learn more, like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. And perhaps most importantly, remember that we're here to help. And should someone you know benefit from our support, please let them know about Sharsheret. I hear far too many women say, I wish I had known about you while I was going through this. So let's make sure fewer women are saying that to us. And if someone in your community or a loved one could benefit from support from Sharsheret, let them know we exist. Now, Peggy and I are both here to answer any questions you may have. And of course, you can always go on if a question comes up afterward, you can always contact us through our website and we'd be happy to get back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Melissa and Peggy. That was really informative and helpful. And honestly, you answered a bunch of the questions that I had in advance. One question that we received from people watching was about diet and specifically about soy. If that's something that you can speak to, and if there are any other things to avoid in one's diet that have some connection.
Sure. So the first thing I want to say is that Sharsheret offers no medical advice, right? We're not MDs. What we can do is frame the issues for you, and that if you have any questions, you really should refer back to your own medical team. What I can tell you a couple of things. The reason soy is an issue is it contains something called phytoestrogens. It's a natural form of estrogen in small amounts in soy products. Before I worked for Sharsheret, and that's an issue if somebody has hormone receptor positive cancer. You want to lower the amount of estrogen because the cancer feeds on estrogen. Before I worked for Sharsheret, there was actually, I talked about the national webinar symposia that we do. I actually logged on to one about nutrition and asked that very same question. And the answer that our expert that we were working with said was, listen, it's a little bit of a controversial topic, and her recommendation was to avoid processed soy products, but to have tofu or tempeh or edamame occasionally would be fine. Again, that's what the expert on the webinar told me, but if you have a specific question, you really should refer back to your OBGYN, your oncologist, your primary care physician.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
You mentioned that one of the first steps is talking to your family about your family history. I was wondering, at what age do you think people should start having this conversation?
Absolutely. I'm going to let Peggy answer that. That's a common question she gets.
So I think this is a reasonable conversation to have with children who are adults. And that can be, sometime in the late teen to early 20 age to have a conversation about this. I think that some of this information, and I don't want to tell people what they should and shouldn't tell their children, but some of this kind of information could be a little bit scary for younger children to somehow start thinking that they might be at risk to develop some kind of cancer because of their family history. And generally, when I speak to someone who has a mutation in their family, I recommend that in terms of speaking to children, it be something that's done gradually. So you might start with, when children are very young, we teach them how to take care of themselves just by taking them to the doctor on a regular basis and having them model our behaviors of getting checkups at the doctor. And then eventually talking about how in our family, we're more careful about going to get taken care of for screening because we have people in our family who've had cancer. And then eventually, once children are adults, they're old enough to really understand that there is something hereditary in our family and you could be tested for it. And we generally recommend that women consider having the genetic testing. A good age would be around 25. And that's an age where we would recommend doing something differently. So someone who tests positive might start getting a breast MRI at 25. Whereas at 18, we're going to tell someone, well, you have something inherited, but there's really not anything to do differently until you're 25. Sometimes it's better to wait until that age of 25. But again, every family is different. Lots of people tell their young teenage children about these things. And it's something that you can talk about in your family and with your physician.
I'd like to just add to that I mentioned we have a Genetics for Life program, and like Peggy said, every family is different. And Peggy, as part of our clinical team, has conversations with individuals all the time about issues similar to this and whether testing is advised or further, whether a further conversation with a doctor is advised, how to talk to children, how to talk to family, what to anticipate before and after. And you just need to reach out to Sharsheret and Peggy will schedule a call to be in touch.
Absolutely. There are always specific circumstances that change what the recommendations are. Sometimes if there's somebody very, very young in the family, someone gets diagnosed with breast cancer in their 20s. That is rare, but it can happen. Then we might be more inclined to test someone a little bit early. So every family is different, and it's always worth discussing with a healthcare provider, or give us a call and I can set up a time to chat with you about your specific situation.
Great, thank you so much. Sounds like you're a really wonderful resource for all aspects of this.
She is.
Where do you recommend going for testing, whether somebody has in their family history or not?
So we think it's very important when getting a genetic test done to use the benefit of a genetic counselor. And that's because genetic counselors are really the people who are best trained to offer the correct genetic test in the specific situation in which it may be needed. And the best way to find a genetic counselor is to go to the website of our national organization, and that is nsgc.org, National Society of Genetic Counselors.org. And there's a Find a Counselor function on the top right-hand corner of the opening page. And you can put in your zip code and you check off that you're interested in finding out about cancer, and do a search, and you can find the names of genetic counselors in your area who might be able to help you. Then you give them a call, find out if they take your insurance, find out when you can get an appointment, and get that set up. And if you have any trouble figuring that out, you give us a call, and I can get on the phone with you and help you figure out what you need to do to find somebody.
Great, thank you. another question is how common is men's breast cancer, and do you work with them as well?
So male breast cancer is pretty rare. In the general population, it occurs in about 1 in 1,000 men, which is not very common. But if someone has a mutation in BRCA2, their chance to get breast cancer is probably 4 to 6%. And that's significantly higher than 1 in 1,000. And so I tend to meet men with breast cancer because just a man with breast cancer by itself is enough to recommend a referral for genetics. And those people don't always test positive. They're usually negative, but it's an important place to start to figure out what's going on in a family tree.
And in terms of working with men who have breast cancer, so Sharsheret, our sweet spot is women who have breast or ovarian cancer. In fact, Jewish women who have breast and ovarian cancer, but we never turn anybody away who needs our support. So what we'll do, and we get calls all the time from people outside of our sweet spot, a man with breast cancer, a woman with uterine cancer, things like that. And what we'll do is help them to the best of our ability, but then ensure that they're receiving the support they need from a more appropriate source. So for instance, a man who has breast cancer, we may have an initial conversation with him, may help him with some of the Jewish cultural or halachic issues, but then we will also introduce him by email to someone at an organization that's specific to men who have breast cancer. We won't just ask them to give them a name of an organization. We'll really make sure that there is a cradle of support and there's never an absence of support. But if it's a man with breast cancer, there's things at this particular organization that specifically deals with that we don't have. So they should have benefit of that support as well.
Incredible. Thank you so much. This was extremely insightful and helpful, and I hope that everyone watching now and watching later will take advantage of all of the amazing resources that you have. If you have any final thoughts, that would be great. Otherwise, we will wrap up.
Just again, I applaud everybody for logging on, signing in to watch. Sometimes this can be a scary topic, as we've mentioned, but the message here is that there's so much to be done and so many ways we can reduce risk by being proactive. And along the way, Sharsheret, whether you have concerns or someone you know has been diagnosed, Sharsheret is here to help.
Great, thank you. And if anybody has any follow-up for JOFA, for Sharsheret, please feel free to reach out. Thank you, both Melissa and Peggy, so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great day.